The Pasha, you know, is Pasha's Terumah, which speaks about, generally speaking, the instruction on how to build a Mishkan. And it starts off, excuse me, Hashem says to Moshe that he should ask Eden that Yikhuli Terumah, that they should take from their possessions, separate some of their possessions and give it for me. And from this we'll build a Mishkan. In other words, the material, the gold and silver and copper and the other material things that will be necessary to build a Mishkan. And here, in this process of building the Mishkan, there are two stages. The first stage is where the Yidden donate and give of their possessions. And the second stage is where these possessions, these gold and silver, are actually used in building the Mishkan. The Rebbe explains on the basis of the Rashi of today's Sedra that the first thing that was necessary in order to facilitate, to make it possible to build a Mishkan, a holy place, was that the article, the material from which it's going to be built, has to be separated. Rashi says, "V'yafreshun kodamai afroshusa." That's the Targum Rashi brings down. They separate it, which means they don't just take from the possession, from the individual possession, and build a Mishkan. He has to separate it and declare it as something that does not belong to him, but belongs to the Mishkan, belongs to Hashem. He gives it over, and then we can take it in and build a Mishkan, and it becomes a holy place. And once it's built into the Mishkan, then the gold and silver itself literally becomes holy. Thank you. The gold and silver itself becomes holy. It is no longer gold and silver that's used for a holy thing, but it itself becomes holy. When the gold that was put into the Oren Kodesh became part of the box that contained the luchos, that box became holy. Just like a Sefer Torah that we write on parchment, and then when you write the Sefer Torah on the parchment itself becomes holy. And I want to discuss this principle, which is very, very significant and very pertinent to understand the principle of separating. We know, for instance, that we have the weekdays and we have Shabbos. Shabbos comes automatically. After 6 days, Friday evening, Shabbos comes in automatically. And yet, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to declare that it's Shabbos. Katshehu, we have to declare this is Shabbos, this is no longer a weekday. When Shabbos ends, at the end of Shabbos, we have to declare that Hamavdil, what is Havdalah Hamavdil? We make a separation. We don't just flow from one to the other. We make a separation. This is holy, and this is mundane. This is chuli. There is an interesting principle that's called Kvias Itim LaTorah. Kvias Itim means to establish time for Torah. And what does that mean? If a person has, let's say, 1 hour to learn, he shouldn't just pick up and learn. He should set the side time aside first. This is the time that is going to be dedicated for this. And then, when the time comes, he learns. The dedication aspect seems to be a very important part in the success in bringing in holiness. The principle behind this, and afterwards we'll bring in how it pertains to us. We have discussed sometimes back, and we said, when we discussed Seichel, we said Seichel Anushi, human intellect. The human intellect, just plain on the human level, not necessarily on the holy level, on the human level. The human intellect dictates how a human being is supposed to behave. Say, for instance, that when a human being has to eat, he does not eat like a cat that puts its face into the food. He lifts the food up to the mouth, and the head remains standing up, and he lifts the food up to his mouth. And everybody understands that that's the right way to eat. And if somebody puts his face into the food, we say, what are you eating like an animal for? What's so significant about lifting the food up to your mouth? Why is that so significant? We say it's a principle. If you do it otherwise, you're acting like an animal. I'm eating. What's the difference? How I eat the food? The main thing is I'm eating kosher food, let's say. What's the principle? The principle is that a human being is fundamentally different than an animal. We discussed this many, many times. Even though he's a physical entity, but he's really fundamentally different. And the difference is that by him the head is above his whole body. And the significance of that the head is above the whole body, is that the head, which is really a spiritual entity, it doesn't, mainly the physical life is the digestive system and the heart and the liver and so forth. The head, it supplies the thought, supplies the idea of the life, the spiritual life to the person. Although a person lives in the physical world, but that is only the place where he's present, where he exists. What is his life essentially consists in? His life is what's going on in the brain, not what's going on in his stomach. And the brain is above the whole thing, the whole physical world. This is why, when he has to eat, in recognition that his principal being is the brain, not the stomach, he will not lower his head into the food. When he lowers his head into the food, he's kind of saying that there is no difference between the head and the stomach. The head is also made to consume food just like the stomach, but that's not the principal function of the head. The principal function of the head is to think and to contemplate godliness, contemplate ideas at the minimum. And therefore it is disrespectful to himself and his complete misunderstanding of who he is and what his life stands for, if he lowers his head into food. He has to keep the separation. In other words, even though the head is part of the same body, and it flows normally, the head, shoulders, and then the heart and so forth, yet we recognize, yes, it's a continuous flow, but there is a separation. There's a difference. The head is the king, and it always stays up, no matter what has to be done. I don't get the head involved in what the stomach is supposed to do. As a matter of fact, it says that it's interesting, the human body is built to reflect and to conform to the way his soul, the way his soul recognizes, the way his soul expresses itself. And therefore we see that the head is not only above the rest of the body, but it's really, in a certain sense, separate. It's connected to the body with a narrow connection, the neck. It doesn't flow like a single unit, like in many animals, where the head is just a continuation of the body, because it's all one thing. The human head is not built that way. The head is a separate entity. It's connected to the body through the neck, through a narrow connection. Because really, it is separate, even though it is connected. This separation is very, very significant, because this separation expresses what is the principle, what is the level of his existence, what the level of his existence is, the physical or the spiritual. By this separation, we are declaring, and this is the nature of the human being, says, no, the spiritual is what I am. Everything else in my body is only to facilitate, to make possible that the spiritual should be in this world. But that's not what I'm living for. I'm not living for my stomach and for anything else. I'm living for what's going on in my head. And in order to maintain that principle, there has to be a separation. It can't just be a straight flow. This is the principle, what the Torah says, that if you want to build a holy temple, you want to build a holy place, even though you're taking gold and silver and copper and all the things that is produced by the world, before you can bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, you first have to declare that it no longer belongs in the mundane world. It's out of there. And then you can bring it into the Beis Hamikdash. You can't take it directly from there. You first have to declare it separate, and then you can bring it in. How does this reflect in our lives? Like I mentioned before about Kviyas Itim LaTorah, and I'll come back to our practical thing. Kviyas Itim LaTorah means that even though you have a certain amount of time that you learn, and practically speaking, what is the difference? I learn an hour, and I just float in from my bed right into the learning. There has to be Kviyas Itim, it has to be established first. In other words, I'm taking this hour away, out of circulation. This hour doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to anything else. That's the first. And then I go and learn it. Then it's a different kind of learning. It says that the success of learning, I mean, you guys are learning by you Kviyas Itim, the whole day is Kavui Itim. But and even by you, when you want to learn certain specific things, it is very, very effective if there's a Tuvia sitting, if it's set up at a particular time. So that time is separated and is taken out of, so to speak, of the general availability of time. Excuse me. Coming back to our own situation here. We here, as I mentioned to you many times in the past, I have it as my goal to give you a taste, to give you an opportunity, not only to learn Torah, but to learn Torah and to get a taste of the Torah, just as a child who grew up from the cradle in Torah. It does not mean just because we came late, for no fault of ours, that we should be missing that particular quality that comes with a holy upbringing. And for this purpose, for this reason, I want to explain, whenever the opportunity comes up, explain, excuse me, what in our background here could be contradictory, could be different than what a holy child has, so that we know what we have to attack and what we have to counteract, and what we have to look for. I once mentioned to you, I remember some time ago, many of you probably have not been here at the time when I told you this story. This is a story of a young man, just like any of us here, who came to learn in yeshiva at the age of 19, 20. Very sensitive boy. And he sat down to learn. And he felt that no matter how much he learns and how much time he puts in, he's never going to feel one with the Torah that he learns. He's always going to be feeling like he's learning it as an outsider. And this bothered him. He wanted to feel that the Torah, this is something which is naturally his. He doesn't feel he's learning something strange. He knows it's true, but it's still strange to him. It's not the way he thought for 20 years. He told me himself this experience that he had, where he craved very much to be able to unite with the Torah that he learns fully. And it bothered him. He used to think about it. And then he said to me that what happened to him one day, that he took a walk in the botanical gardens, in Crown Heights Botanical Gardens. He went to the botanical gardens. In Crown Heights, there's nice gardens. And he was thinking about this, and it bothered him a lot. He sat down on a bench, and he thought about it very much, how he feels something is missing, and it's never going to break through. I'm always going to be missing. And he said it bothered him so deeply that he started to cry. And he cried very strongly. Cried for a long time. And he said, after that, I felt like a different person. I washed it out, he says. I didn't feel a stranger anymore. Broke away. I broke away from where I was and I came in peace. It's important for us to understand. Now, I'm not urging anyone here to go and cry. but I want that we should understand what's in front of us and what is the approach to Torah. We discussed a few weeks ago the Inyan von Yetzias Mitzrayim, that Mitzrayim was the preparation for Matan Torah. I hope you still remember, I explained that even in Mitzrayim have reached a state of complete self-nullification. They were non-entities. And then, when they came out of Mitzrayim, and the Torah was given to them, the Torah is what declared them as a nation. We didn't have a nationhood before. It wasn't something that they needed to change over. They were completely nothing. They had no nationhood, no personal ID. And then the Torah defined them as who they are. That's why the Torah begins, the Maseres Adibris begin with Onoicha Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzitzicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. I have taken you out of Mitzrayim, not I created the world. In other words, the principle of Matan Torah is not how great Hashem is, He created the world. The principle of Matan Torah is what is my relationship with Hashem is that He took us out of Mitzrayim, which means He made us into a nation, and therefore my whole nationhood, my whole definition of the self is by the fact that I have a Torah. This is what defines who I am. Okay. Each one of us has to do their thing. It's all right. The similar thing, pertains to us here. We come, as we spoke many times, we come with a whole load, with a whole background. Some of us have all kinds of experiences, very intricate, involved experiences. Some of our most simple, but all of us have come from a culture, from a background that recognizes the world as the reality. Excuse me? As the reality, as the basis of existence. Then it's a question, how do you behave in the world? You have to be a good person in the world, outside a good person, a better person, a smarter person, a richer person. It's all how you define yourself, so to speak, from a perspective of the world. But what is the reality of the world? From world to understand godliness is virtually impossible. Because world and godliness are opposites. We can understand godliness from the world only in the sense, oh, thank you, God, you're making my world. Essentially, it's like, thank you for giving me a candy. But that's not what Torah is about. Torah relates us directly to God. It says, what is the definition of my life? Like we say in the morning when we wake up, what is the meaning that I have woken up? The meaning I have woken up is that Hashem returned my neshama to me. That's the whole, the basic definition of who I am. So that what this is clearly states is that in order for us to get to learn Torah and to learn Torah in a manner that the Torah is absorbed and sticks to us, and everything that we learn is not rejected because of our previous experiences, because we have kashas, but it's also actually, it sticks, it's absorbed. The first thing we have to do is to know that we are separating, we're breaking away from where we were. It isn't only that because of my previous experience, my world experience taught me that this is the right way to live. Which means this is still basically a continuum of my previous experience. That doesn't work in Kedusha. In order to bring it into Kedusha, there has to be a separation. First you have to declare it out, away from where it was, and then you first begin to define it as Torah, as Kedusha.
You're talking about in terms of values.
In terms of values, and in terms of understanding what you're learning from as an insider, from an inside perspective rather than from an outside perspective. You can understand the same thing, but there is a huge gap, a huge difference between understanding it as an outsider or as an insider. Just as if you're observing a building from outside, you see the whole size of the building. But when you're inside, you have a completely different sense of what this building is about than the impression that you have from outside. I once discussed here, and I want to refresh this opinion to us, because as I said, I believe that this is very important. And again, you have to understand that the way Torah is meant to be learned, and the way Torah, each one of us will eventually appreciate it, is that the first thing when I say a word of Torah, the first thing is I can easily absorb it. I can easily accept it. Then I need to understand more about it. But the first thing is it's acceptable. This acceptability is very, very important. Just as food, the process of absorbing food starts in the mouth. And the first stage of absorption is the taste. If I taste something that I don't like, my body, my taste buds reject, then I'm not really taking it in fully. I'm not really relating to it. And the truth is that this is one of the reasons, at least, the fact that there is such thing as taste in food, is because the taste opens the body to be able to accept the food. Because if the body rejects the food, no matter what happens, it can digest it, it's not going to accept it. So the first place is in the taste. Once the taste passes it and it accepts it, then it goes into the digestive system. And what happens in the digestive system? It gets further broken down, and it gets broken down to such a fine entity, to the point where eventually some of the food becomes really part of the blood and part of the flesh. How does it become part of the blood and the flesh, and part of the flesh? When it starts off, it's an external entity. It's a piece of food outside of the body, completely external. How does something external become part of my flesh or my blood? It becomes so refined and so finely broken down and digested that there's no longer any difference. The minerals in the food have been so completely isolated that they just flow right into the bloodstream. I don't know if it's an interesting phenomenon, just to point out that really how the minerals go into the blood. It doesn't go through any kind of a pipeline or any kind of a conduit. It's absorbed through the membrane, through the skin of the blood vessels. It goes right in because there's no difference. It gets absorbed through. Yeah. The intestine goes right absorbed through and through, because it becomes so refined and there is no difference. And that's when it becomes absorbed. Torah has a very similar process. We can learn a lot of Torah, know a lot of Torah. That's like having the Torah in our stomach. That's not the point. The point is it should become part of the bloodstream. And in order that it should become part of the bloodstream, it has to be, firstly, accepted. Okay, this is what I want to absorb. This is what I want to digest. I want to make it part of myself. Every word of Torah, whether we understand it fully and we understand nothing fully, to whatever extent we understand, whatever, like we said the other day, when a child says Aleph Beis, he's davening, he's learning Torah. It doesn't have to be something that. Hello? Hello? I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of class right now. In a half. Yeah, you could. That's fine. Fine. Okay. Bye-bye. That's the requirement of separation. The learning Torah process is exactly identical to that. When we learn, it's very important that we know that whatever I learn, whether I understand it or not, that's not the judge whether I should accept it or not. If that becomes the judge, then I never really absorb it. Then I take it on the basis of my judgment. It's not food that is being fed into me.
Taste.
Yes. I have to accept it. I have to eat it. And then it can go through the digestive system and understand it more and more and more. But I cannot be an outsider and learn Torah. The Gemara says that Torah can have, chas v'sholem, a detrimental effect on the person if it's not learned properly. Torah is called sam. Sam means like a medicine. Medicine, if it's taken in properly, it can it can have a medicinal and a curative power. If it's taken improperly, so we know the sickness of today, the drugs that destroy the person. Torah, if it's taken improperly, becomes samchaim, the Gemara says. Samchaim, it becomes the medicine of life. And if chas v'sholom otherwise, it can be the opposite. There's a story which I also mentioned, I believe. It's a very interesting episode in the life of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Cheder, was a child, and his father came to the Cheder, came to the classroom to test the boys. And test the boys in the class, young boys. The Frierdiker Rebbe was one of the classmates, and they did very well. You can imagine, the boys learned, they did very well. But the test lasted a certain duration of time, and Frierdiker Rebbe was a very, very lively child, very joyous and lively child. So as he was sitting and by the test, he glanced through the window and he saw that it was a beautiful spring day. And a thought kind of fluttered through his mind, when is this going to be over so I can go outside and play? Right? Perfectly natural. His father, the Rebbe Rashab, noticed this whole transaction, this whole thought process that went through his mind. And he stopped the test, right in the middle of a sentence, and he stopped. And he said to him, it's better to be outside and looking inside than to be on the inside and look outside. In other words, you can be inside in learning, but you have to be inside complete. If you're not inside complete, then it's preferable to be, if you're outside and looking inside and craving to be inside, that's even better than being inside and craving to be outside.
If you're outside, you don't crave to be outside.
It's important to understand this principle that when we come to yeshiva to learn Torah, this is not a continuation. Even though we are certainly using all our experience and we all coming with developed intellects, with a whole bunch of experience, and we know what we're looking for and all that is very helpful, there's no question about it. But we come here to learn what Hashem is teaching us. Not to observe and say, see how much of what Hashem is saying I agree with and how much I'm not agreeing with. That's not the way to learn. There has to be a complete separation, a hevdel, a havdalah, saying, okay, I'm out, I don't belong to the rest of the world. I belong here. And then we can absorb. This is true for us here in the yeshiva. And this is true that we should understand in a very general, in a broader sense. In a broader sense, we have to understand that even though we live in a big world and there are people that we are associated with and we had neighbors that we were very friendly with and they were very fine people and all that, no question about it. Nevertheless, there has to be recognition. There has to be a separation between kodesh l'choil, between that which is holy and that which is mundane. Holy is not just better than the mundane; it's a different category. It's a different world. And in our own life, it's the same thing. You know, most of you, I'm sure, do it many times. Some of you do it daily. In the morning, before we daven, we go to mikveh. Why we need to go to mikveh for? Purify. What does that mean? Why was I impure before? Mikveh, there are different aspects of mikveh. But one of the aspects of mikveh, you know that a ger has to be toivel himself in order to become a Jew. It's a transition. And when we come to daven, we have to go through the transition. This is mundane. I can't go from sleep into davening. I'm too worldly. This is mundane and this is holy. And in order to separate and go from mundane to holy, I have to submerge myself in water completely, overhead.
The same thing like in davening.
Excuse me?
The same thing like in davening.
Right.
You have to submerge yourself.
Well, in order to get into davening, this is why mikveh is a tremendous assist in the whole day, and especially for davening, because it brings a person away from the mundane and brings him to the holy. It seems to be a very trivial thing. Al Pidin, you don't have to go to mikveh. There's no such thing. But in essence, it's extremely significant. And this is essentially what we see from today's parsha, where the Rebbe said we have to build the Beis Hamikdash, a holy place. But in order to build a holy place, first we have to separate the material from the mundane. When you have a chance, in Mitzvah Hashem, you'll take a look. There's a whole sikha from Rebbe about this, and it's interesting how the Rebbe brings out and explains the Rashi. That Rashi is actually saying this principle: that first you have to say Yafrashum, first you have to separate, and then you can make it holy. Everyone that learns in yeshiva, this is in Rebbe's yeshiva. This is a yeshiva for Torah and for holiness. No matter what our backgrounds are, everyone who learns in yeshiva has made a declaration that there are two parts in the world. There is the holy and there is the mundane. And I belong here and don't belong over there. The minute one recognizes, the minute one comes to the yeshiva, as long as he is halfway here, halfway then, he's not going to get a taste of Torah. The minute one recognizes that he is inside, fully, with both feet, that's when he first begins to really absorb Torah. No matter for how long it is, when he is here 100%, this is when he begins to be absorbed. And the Torah becomes his food, gives him spiritual food, spiritual nourishment. And then, when he goes out and looks at the world, he sees the same physical world, but it has a totally different meaning to him. He sees it totally from a different perspective completely. Essentially, like the Rambam describes, that he sees the world not as a world that God created, but a godly world. Everything that he sees how this actually represents a godly principle. So I'm really praying and wishing and hoping to be able to help, and this was successful, to get the real feel of Torah. To feel that the Torah is my Torah, not somebody else's. Not something that's good to have. But this is our life. This is the life of the Jewish people. This is the life of the Yid. There is a saying that the Mittel Rebbe, you heard the Mittel Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's, the Baal HaTanya's son, that the Mittel Rebbe, if you cut his vein,
It wasn't regular blood. It was Torah.
Torah would flow. Chassidus would flow instead of blood.
Live. In a sense like that. Yeah.
Maybe sometimes we'll have a chance to discuss it as time is coming. But it's general. What it means is that just as when you wake up in the morning and you see a beautiful morning, beautiful day, it gives you encouragement. It wakes you up, right? It arouses you, which means this is the flow of life through your brain that comes into you. The real flow of life is understanding Chassidus, knowing the insights of Chassidus. That's the real flow of life. This is what really makes a person live. In any case, coming back to us, and I said, I really hope that each one of us will break through the barriers and make a complete severance with anything mundane, anything that we have to live in a mundane world, but we are coming from inside. We are using the Torah to direct us what we have to do. There's an expression, the expression in Chassidus. How do I know that the world exists? The Torah says. Says, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz." This is what confirms the fact that the world exists. Okay. Should have lots of success in our Lebedike learning. It should be a learning with life, with chayas.
Amen. And pull the stone.